Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be talking about Schindler's List, the Steven Spielberg film. And our source today is IMDb, so we're going to kind of focus on interesting facts, trivia, behind-the-scenes stuff. Maybe not so much a deep dive into the film itself, but kind of more of the fun stuff surrounding it. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was that one of the survivors of Schindler's List, Mila Hefferberg, when she met Ralph Fiennes on set, she started shaking uncontrollably because he reminded her so much of the real A.N. Göth.
Yeah, that's a chilling story. I imagine a lot of the survivors had some pretty intense reactions to seeing these actors who were embodying these figures from their past.
It's really powerful, and it makes you think about the weight that Ralph Fiennes carried in that role, to have that kind of impact, not only on the audiences, but on the survivors themselves.
I think before we get into too much of the trivia, it might be worth just giving a little bit of background for anyone who may not be familiar with Schindler's List. The film...
I mean, it's a pretty famous film, but
It was released in 1994. It tells the true story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved the lives of over 1,000 Polish Jewish refugees during the Holocaust by employing them in his factories.
Yeah, and the film itself is a masterpiece.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. And is currently ranked number 7 on IMDb's top-rated movies list, so it's pretty high up there. And one of the things I always remember about the film is the quote, "Power is when we have every justification to kill and we don't."
Absolutely, and that comes from that pivotal scene between Schindler and Amon Göth. The Commandant of the Plaszow concentration camp. And Göth is sort of boasting about his absolute authority over life and death, and then Schindler counters with that line.
And it's such a powerful statement, and it makes you think about, like, what real power is, you know, not just the power to kill, but the power to choose not to.
Exactly. It's a choice, and it's a choice that Schindler embodies throughout the film. And it's part of what makes him such a...
Well, and it's interesting because he's not portrayed as a perfect person in the film either.
He's a deeply flawed individual. But he makes this choice, and that's what makes him so compelling.
So let's get into some of the more fun stuff. We talked about Mila Hefferberg's reaction to Ralph Fiennes. But there's another interesting fact about the ending of the film. Apparently, there are differences between the theatrical release and the VHS version.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So in the theatrical version of the film, the ending scene at Schindler's grave features both the actors and actual survivors placing stones on the grave. But in the VHS release, they modified it so it only showed the actual survivors.
That's interesting. I wonder why they would have made that decision.
It does make you wonder, right? Like, what was the thinking behind that? It's a subtle change, but it is kind of significant in a way.
Maybe they felt that in the theatrical release, the presence of the actors might have distracted from the real focus, which was the survivors themselves and their tribute to Schindler.
And I mean, it really brings home the reality of the story and the lasting impact that Schindler had on these people's lives. And speaking of impact, did you know that the film's ending song actually varies depending on the audience?
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So most of the world experienced the ending with Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, which translates to Jerusalem of Gold. But Israeli audiences got a different song, Eli, Eli.
Interesting.
By Hannah Scenes.
Okay, so I'm guessing there's a reason behind that choice. Like, it's not just a random preference?
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's actually very nuanced. So Yerushalayim Shel Zahav was composed in 1967 after the Six-Day War, and it's a much more contemporary celebratory song. So using that for an audience that's very familiar with the Holocaust might have created this kind of weird disconnect.
That makes sense.
Because it's a very different tone. Whereas Eli was written during World War II. It has a much more somber and reflective tone, so it's much more fitting.
Much more appropriate.
So it's interesting that they made that choice.
It really shows the care and attention to detail that went into making this film and how they wanted it to resonate with different audiences in a sensitive and meaningful way.
And speaking of choices and impact, we need to address a pretty significant Göth that IMDb points out. And this isn't just like a minor continuity area or something. This is something that actually changes a key aspect of the film's narrative.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
So according to IMDb, the film states that Oskar Schindler was declared righteous in 1958.
Okay.
But in reality, he wasn't officially recognized as righteous among the nations.
Wow.
Until 1993.
Really, the year the film was released?
The very year the film premiered.
That's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost 20 years after his death.
Yeah, that's a significant detail to get wrong.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how did this happen? And also, how would audiences have perceived the film differently if they had known this?
Exactly. It's like watching the film in 1993, knowing that this man's heroism hadn't even been formally acknowledged until that very year.
Yeah, it kind of adds a new layer to the whole story.
Absolutely. It definitely makes you think about Schindler's legacy in a different light.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if the film itself played a role in him finally.
That's what I was thinking. Like, did Schindler's List help bring his story to wider attention and maybe even influence the decision to honor him?
It's a pretty amazing thought.
It is. It's like the film becomes part of his story in a way.
Yeah, it's like this weird feedback loop where art and history are kind of influencing each other.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that our understanding of history is always evolving as new information emerges.
Right, and that sources like IMDb can be really valuable for kind of digging deeper and uncovering those layers of nuance and complexity.
Absolutely. They allow us to go beyond the surface level and really get a more complete picture of the past.
Yeah, and speaking of digging deeper, there's another aspect of the film that I find really fascinating, and that's the use of different ending songs for different audiences.
Oh, yeah, we touched upon that earlier. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, we did. I want to kind of go a little deeper into that because I think it's a really powerful example of how the filmmakers were sensitive to the cultural and historical context.
Absolutely. The choice to use Eli, Eli for Israeli audiences instead of Jerusalem of Gold is fascinating.
Right. So like I mentioned, Jerusalem of Gold is much more celebratory and upbeat, whereas Eli is a prayer. It's a cry for help. It's much more somber and reflective.
Yeah.
So how do you think those contrasting moods shape the viewer's experience at the end of the film?
Well, imagine watching this incredibly powerful and emotional film about the Holocaust.
Right.
And then it ends with this triumphant, almost joyful song.
Yeah.
For some audiences, that might work. But from an Israeli audience who has such a deep and personal connection to this history, it might feel jarring. It might feel almost disrespectful.
Yeah, it's like putting a happy song at the end of a really sad story.
It doesn't quite fit.
Right, it doesn't fit.
But Eli, Eli is different. It's a song born out of suffering and resilience. And it speaks directly to the themes of the film.
So for an Israeli audience, hearing that song wouldn't just be listening to music. It would be like connecting with a shared cultural experience.
Absolutely. It would add a whole other layer of meaning and emotional resonance.
It's almost like the filmmakers are saying, we recognize your experience, we understand your history, and we want to honor that.
Exactly. And that level of sensitivity is part of what makes Schindler's List such a powerful film.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It really is. And it's a reminder that even small choices, like the selection of a song, can have a profound impact on the overall experience of a film.
And it's important to remember that Schindler's List isn't just a Holocaust film.
Right.
It's a story about individual choices, about the capacity for both good and evil.
Absolutely. It would be easy to just portray the Nazis as pure evil and Schindler as a flawless hero.
Right.
But the film goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
It shows the complexity of human nature, the struggles with conscience.
It humanizes everybody involved.
Exactly. It shows that even in the most horrific circumstances, people still have the power to choose.
And it makes Schindler's actions even more impactful because he's not perfect.
Right. He's flawed. He makes mistakes, but ultimately he chooses to do the right thing.
Yeah. And that scene where he breaks down and cries.
Oh, yeah.
Saying he could have saved more lives if he had sold his car or his pin.
That's such a powerful scene.
It's so powerful because it shows his humanity, his regret.
Yeah. It shows that even in the face of such immense evil, there's still room for personal responsibility and moral choice.
And that message transcends the specific historical context.
Absolutely. It speaks to the human condition as a whole. It's a reminder that we all have the capacity for both good and evil, and that our choices ultimately define who we are.
And it's all the more powerful coming from a film that doesn't shy away from the horrors of the Holocaust.
Right. It shows the brutality, the dehumanization, the sheer scale of the tragedy.
Yeah.
But it also shows the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the possibility of redemption.
So it's like even in the darkest moments of history, there were still acts of kindness, compassion, and resistance.
Exactly. There were individuals who chose to stand up for what was right, even at great personal risk.
And it's so important to remember and honor those stories.
Absolutely. They remind us that even in the face of overwhelming evil, the human spirit can endure and even triumph.
And that's where films like Schindler's List are so crucial. They serve as these powerful reminders of the consequences of hatred and indifference, and they inspire us to work towards a more just and compassionate world.
And they show us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, always the possibility for redemption, always the power of individual choice to make a difference.
I think you said that beautifully.
Thank you. And I think that message continues to resonate with audiences today, perhaps even more so in a world that often feels increasingly divided and uncertain.
I agree. Schindler's List isn't just a film about the past.
Right.
It's a film for our present.
Exactly. It's a film that challenges us to examine our own beliefs and actions and to strive to be a force for good in the world. And perhaps that's the most enduring legacy of this film, its ability to spark these important conversations, to challenge our assumptions, and to inspire us to act with courage and compassion.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have. We've explored some intriguing trivia, delved into some of the deeper themes, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our discussion.
Yeah, me too. And for those of you listening who haven't seen Schindler's List, I highly recommend checking it out.
It's a powerful and moving film that will stay with you long after the credits roll.
Yeah, and if you've already seen it, maybe this deep dive will inspire you to revisit it with a fresh perspective.
Absolutely, or to learn more about Oskar Schindler and his legacy.
Either way, we hope this first part of our deep dive has given you some new insights.
And sparked your curiosity?
Exactly. Join us for part 2, where we'll continue our exploration of Schindler's List and delve deeper into the nuances of this remarkable film.
It's going to be fascinating.
I can't wait. So we were just talking about how the film got the year wrong for Schindler being declared righteous.
Yeah.
It's like this tiny detail, but it kind of makes you rethink the whole film.
It really does, right? Like, imagine watching this back in '93, knowing that Schindler's heroism was just recognized that year.
It's like, wow, this film could be part of why he was finally honored.
Exactly. It makes you think about how stories can change things, bring these hidden figures into the light.
And maybe even change history.
Yeah. It's a cool example of how art and history kind of intertwine.
Like, the film isn't just telling Schindler's story, it becomes part of his story.
Exactly. And it reminds us that history is never really settled.
Yeah, what we think is true can change with new information.
And that's where sources like IMDb come in.
Right. They help us dig deeper, uncover those little details that make the story richer.
Yeah, going beyond the surface level.
Speaking of digging deeper,
Okay.
there's another thing about the film that I find interesting.
What's that?
The different ending songs for different audiences.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that a bit, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of how the filmmakers were so careful about the cultural and historical context.
Right, like using Eli, Eli for Israeli audiences instead of Jerusalem of Gold.
Exactly. So Jerusalem of Gold is like this big celebratory song, but Eli, Eli is a prayer, almost a cry for help.
Yeah.
Much more somber and reflective.
Right.
How do you think those different moods affect how people feel at the end of the film?
Well, imagine you've just watched this incredibly emotional story about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And then it ends with this really happy song.
It wouldn't feel right.
It would feel kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
Especially for an Israeli audience.
Right. They have such a strong connection to this history.
It might even feel disrespectful.
Like putting a party song at the end of a sad story.
Exactly. It doesn't fit.
But Eli is different.
Yeah.
It comes from suffering and resilience.
And speaks to the themes of the film.
So for Israelis, hearing that song wouldn't just be about the music.
It would be about connecting with their own history.
A shared experience.
It adds so much more meaning.
It's like the filmmakers are saying, we get it. We understand your history and we want to honor it.
That sensitivity is part of what makes the film so powerful.
Yeah. It's amazing how much thought went into every detail.
And it shows that even small choices, like a song, can totally change how a film feels.
It's important to remember that Schindler's List isn't just about the Holocaust, though.
Right.
It's about the choices we make.
The capacity for both good and evil.
Exactly. It would be easy to make the Nazis pure evil and Schindler a perfect hero.
But the film is more complex than that.
It shows the struggles people face.
Their internal battles.
It makes everyone feel more human.
Even in the worst situations, people still have choices.
And it makes what Schindler did even more powerful because he wasn't perfect.
Right. He messed up, but he still tried to do the right thing.
Like that scene where he's crying, wishing he could have saved more people.
Oh, man, that scene gets me every time.
It shows how much he cared.
Even when surrounded by such horror, he still felt responsible.
And that message is bigger than just the Holocaust.
It's about being human. It's about recognizing that we all have the potential for good and bad.
And our choices show who we really are.
It's a powerful message, especially coming from a film that doesn't shy away from the awful reality of the Holocaust.
Right. It shows the brutality, the inhumanity of it all.
But it also shows the strength of the human spirit.
The hope that things can get better.
The possibility of change.
So even in the darkest times,
there were still acts of kindness.
Of courage.
Of standing up for what's right.
And those are the stories we need to remember.
They show us that even facing unimaginable evil, people can choose to do good.
And films like Schindler's List help us keep those stories alive.
They remind us what can happen when hate and indifference take over.
And inspire us to build a better world.
A world where those horrors never happen again.
And they show that even in the darkest times,
there's always hope.
Always the chance for redemption.
And always the power of choice.
Beautifully said. I think that message is so important today.
Especially now when things feel so divided and uncertain.
Schindler's List isn't just about the past.
It's a film for right now.
It challenges us to look at ourselves.
And ask if we're doing enough to make the world a better place.
And maybe that's the film's greatest legacy.
It makes us think. It makes us talk. It inspires us to act.
Well said. We've gone pretty deep in this second part of our dive.
We have. We've explored the film's impact.
The complexities of good and evil.
And the power of hope and resilience.
Wow, it's been quite a journey exploring Schindler's List today.
It really has so many layers to uncover.
Yeah, from little fun facts to these big questions about history and the power of film.
I know, it's amazing how one film can spark so much discussion.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways is that idea that the film might have actually helped Schindler get recognized as righteous among the nations.
Right. Like Spielberg's vision bringing this story to life, maybe it helped right a historical wrong.
It makes you think about how art can change things.
Absolutely. It's not just entertainment.
It can be a force for good, for justice even.
And it shows how important it is to keep telling these stories.
To keep the memory of the Holocaust alive so we can learn from it and prevent it from happening again.
Exactly.
And that brings me to a question for you listening. Knowing that Schindler wasn't declared righteous until the same year the film came out, does that change how you see him?
That's a good question. Does it make his actions less meaningful because he wasn't recognized for so long?
Right. Or does it make them even more powerful because he did it without expecting any reward?
He acted purely out of conscience?
It really adds another dimension to his character.
It makes you think about what true heroism is, doing the right thing just because it's right.
Not for recognition or praise.
And it shows that one person can make a huge difference even when surrounded by such darkness.
That's the heart of Schindler's List, I think.
It's a message that still resonates today.
It reminds us that we all have a part to play in making the world a better place.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into Schindler's List.
I've really enjoyed it.
We've uncovered so much about the film, its impact, and the man himself, Oskar Schindler.
And had some great conversations along the way.
For anyone listening who hasn't seen the film, I can't recommend it enough.
It's a powerful and moving experience.
And for those who have, maybe this deep dive will inspire you to watch it again with a fresh perspective.
Or to learn more about Schindler and the people he saved.
We hope this deep dive has given you something to think about.
And sparked your curiosity to keep exploring.
That's what the deep dive is all about.
Learning, growing, and discovering new perspectives.
Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic.
Until then, keep exploring.